walking on an old road, singing a new song, bouncing back and forth in time, and I'm trying just to hum along, while these mystical connections keep happening to me. I finally got the gates unlocked, and I'm running free, standing by the ancient shrine, looking up at satellite, thinking back to another time so strange, but it feels so right. I am not this little man drifting on my own, a body wrapped around an ancient soul headed home. We are one ocean, waves roll on and never stop. One ocean, the ocean is in every drop, in every drop. The feeling doesn't go away. This joy we found is here to stay. We're on our way to high ground. We're really not so far apart. We're traveling from head to heart, and though the ways are many, there's just one destination. We are one ocean, from the bottom to the top. One ocean, and the ocean is in every drop. One ocean, we are one ocean. Where does everybody go when the spirit calls them to the flow? Somehow you know we need not be afraid. We will find our family where the rivers run into the sea, stretching endlessly. We can see we are one ocean. We are one ocean. We are one ocean. We are one ocean. We are
Oh, thank you, Barry. Thank you, band. We have the world's greatest band here at Mile High Church. And welcome everybody to Wednesday Night Live right here at Mile High. And it's a very special night because we have blessed people in the room for the first time on a Wednesday night. So thank you for your presence. Thank you very much. And please know that next week you can go on our website and put your name down to be able to come, because we'd like to have a lot more people here. But thank you for your presence. Sure. And we have a wonderful series that's going on. It's entitled Rekindling the Sacred. And it's about loving the earth, realizing that the earth is not so much a resource, but it is a source. And so last week we had Reverend Simon speak. It was a dynamic message. And tonight we are gifted to have Reverend Masando speaking tonight on interconnection and interdependency. So it's going to be dynamic, and so right now I'm going to just kind of turn it over to this fantastic band and just enjoy.
The world is a garden, so fertile and fine, and we get to tend while we're together in time. We live in a greenhouse. What a beautiful show. We're learning by reaping all the seeds that we sow. We're growing our garden. We're planting good seed. Love in the rain, love in the sun. We got all that we need. Already seeing the harvest that'll come in its own good time. We're growing our garden, and we're all growing up just fine. When the weeds come a-calling, as weeds always do, we'll take time to pull them so all the good can get through. So glad to be in this garden, working together with you. We're keeping it simple, and we're keeping it true. We're growing our garden, we're planting good seed. Love in the rain, love in the sun. We got all that we need. Already seeing the harvest that'll come in its own good time. We're growing our garden, and we're all growing up just fine. The world is a garden, so fertile and fine, and we get to tend it while we're together in time. We live in a greenhouse. What a beautiful show. We're learning by reaping all the seeds that we sow. We're growing our garden. We're planting good seed. Love in the rain, love in the sun. We got all that we need. Already seeing the harvest that'll come in its own good time. We're growing our garden, and we're all growing up just fine. Yeah, we're growing our garden, and we're all growing up just fine. Please welcome warmly Masando Hiraoka right now.
Is it nice to get some applause, Dr. Barry? It's been a little while. We got some people in the house. It's so nice to have people starting to join us again. Dr. Barry wrote that song. Actually, all the songs that you'll hear tonight, he's an amazing musician and artist. So yeah, keep it going for Dr. Barry. And thanks so much, Dr. Patty, for that lovely introduction. The doctors are definitely in the house tonight. It is such an honor to be sharing the stage with them tonight. If y'all don't know, Dr. Barry is actually an amazing gardener. That song, I love the opening lyrics to that song. The world is a garden so fertile and fine, and we get to tend it while we're together in time. I love this idea of that we're just sharing this time on earth together. We get this little bit of time, and this whole world is a garden, and we get to tend it. While we're here, I am a little bit of a gardener. My wife just grew up gardening with her family, and so I've been learning little bits here and there. I know how to plant a little baby, and I know how to water, but that's the extent of my knowledge at this point. But as I spend more time with her and her family, you get to realize how amazing gardening is, how complex it is, right? It's not just about watering, it's like the quality of light and how much light this plant gets. It's about the soil and the pH of the soil and the health of the little microorganisms that live in that soil. There are so many things that are going on as it grows, like hailstorms that, we all in Colorado freak out about, those of us that garden every time there's a hailstorm. And, there could be these really long stretches of hot days. And all of these things, right, have impact on this little plant, and you realize how amazing and resilient these plants are, how they can bounce back from these things just like us, right? But how delicate it all is too, how all of these things fit together in this really delicate way in order for this plant to grow. And it reminds me, as we're going through this Earth Day series, just how delicate this entire planet is in so many ways. I have a childhood friend. His name is Ben, who I've known since I was 6 years old. He's living up in Anchorage, Alaska now, and he is getting his PhD to become a marine biologist. He's living the dream. This dude used to be reading like marine biology books, for fun, like this kid growing up in Colorado, and I was always just like really confused by that. But he's living the dream right now, and he's been talking to me about like some of the things that are happening where he lives, right? And how, this thing called climate change is happening like right before his eyes, right? And how fragile everything is in order for these, these ecosystems and these animals to really thrive. He talked about like last summer, there's this crazy phenomenon, right? Where like thousands upon thousands of these like seabirds, these little seabirds, were just washing up on the shore and just like lining the ocean, all dead, right? And they were just like piling up, like just as far as the eye could see, and it was really tragic. And at first, he didn't know what was going on. And it turns out, like their main food source, it's this little bait fish, right? Because the temperature of the ocean just has raised just like a fraction of a degree, has caused these little bait fish, right, just the main food source of these seabirds, just to move a little bit deeper in the ocean, right? And so these birds that have evolved to dive and get these bait fish, they no longer can do that. Like they just can't reach their food. And so they've essentially just been starving to death. And they estimate like over 500,000 of these seabirds have died just over the past year, right? You realize how delicate these things are. And, it's happening in all of these other just interesting ways that are impacting both, animals and humans. He talked about how essentially what's going on up there in Alaska is like the summers are getting longer and the winters are getting shorter. And what's happening is it's confusing some of these animals, like our beloved bears, who are just kind of waking up a little too early. And so normally when they wake up, they go out to the beach and they feast on all these mussels and clams and all those other delicious morsels that we humans love to eat too. But because there's still like this layer of ice there, because they've woken up too early, they can't get to that food source. And so, of course, where do they go? They go other places looking for food, which often ends up being in people's houses, right? And I like to imagine they're going straight for the honey. That's just like the picture I have in my mind. But, there's a lot more interactions that are happening between the bears and humans. You realize how delicate these things are. And what it's making me, realize is like for Ben, right, for my buddy, climate change is happening right before his eyes. And, being in the scientific community, he's, publishing papers and reading papers from his colleagues. And literally every single one of the papers that he reads from his colleagues and that he's publishing, like they all have climate change mentioned in them, right? Like every single paper that is being published right now talks about the ways in which climate change is impacting the ecosystems and the animals and the plants that they're studying, every single one of them. right? And yet, like for me, us living here, where it may not be in our face, it's hard to like kind of take these things seriously. I even like think about climate change, and it feels like if we don't do something now, then 50 or 100 years down the road, right? Like that's when things might get really bad. And it's amazing to just kind of remember that, like, no, things are happening right now, right? But I realize like that I have a hard time even knowing all that, having an intellectual understanding of all these things. I think I still have a whole time like holding the sense of urgency that I think is probably required for all of us collectively, right? To begin to make these changes, right? Like even talking about all these things, I can feel like how I haven't really done anything different, right? Like I haven't really lived my life in a way that has been seeking to address this thing in a big way. And I ask myself, like, why? Like, why is that? And I think for me, when I ask myself that question, I think the first thing that comes to me is I feel like there's a part of me that has forgotten about our interconnection, has forgot about our interdependence. There's a part of me that has forgotten about how connected I am, even if to everything and everyone, even if I can't see it on a day-to-day basis. And so, you may even ask too, like, why are we even talking about this in church, right? Is this a political thing? Is Masando being political again from the stage? OMG. And, for me, when we talk about these things, when we talk about climate change, it's not a political thing. This is about our spiritual life. There's a former dean of the Yale School of Environmental Studies. His name's Gus Spieth. I think he gives us a clue into what we're talking about here. He says, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So for him, right, the scientist who's really leading the way, he's recognizing like, this isn't an environmental problem. All the science in the world isn't changing things. This is a spiritual problem. This is a spiritual crisis. And it has to do with the fact that perhaps we've all forgotten how interconnected we are to the world. Brené Brown, in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she talks about this in a similar way when she talks about this idea of like a spiritual crisis, right? She says, when I look through the 200,000 plus pieces of data my team and I have collected over the past 15 years, I can only conclude our world is in a collective spiritual crisis. She goes on to say, this is especially true if you think about the core of that definition of spirituality. And this is how she defines spirituality. She says, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. And she kind of gives some commentary on what she thinks is going on. She says, right now, we are neither recognizing nor celebrating our inextricable connection. We are divided from others in almost every area of our lives. We're not showing up with one another in a way that acknowledges our connection. Cynicism and distrust have a stranglehold over our hearts. And rather than continuing to move toward a vision of shared power among people, we're witnessing a backslide to a vision of power that is the key to the autocrat's power over people. Addressing this crisis will require a tremendous amount of courage. For the moment, most of us are either making the choice to protect ourselves from conflict, discomfort, and vulnerability by staying quiet or picking sides, and in the process, slowly and paradoxically adopting the behavior of the people we're fighting. Either way, the choices we're making to protect our beliefs and ourselves are leaving us disconnected, afraid, and lonely. Very few people are working on connection outside the lines drawn by their side. Finding love and true belonging in our shared humanity is going to take tremendous resolution and courage. It just makes me think, right? Like, these divides that we're experiencing in our country, the divides that put us into this gridlock when it comes to climate change, of nothing happening, right? The divides that have us kind of pointing our fingers at each other and criticizing each other. The divides that feel political, right? And politically motivated and politically drawn. They're not political divides, right? Like, they're spiritual ones. The crisis isn't only a physical one. It's not only an ecological one, right? The crisis that we're having is spiritual. And it seems like the call right now for our time, for whatever reason, and this time that we're tending this garden together, it seems to be one in which we're being called to simply remember our deep inner connection with each other. Our deep inner dependence upon each other, recognizing like it's going to take all of us to move forward. Recognizing like, okay, like we all, no matter what our political persuasion, affiliation, or identity, like we're all sharing the same planet together. And something I think is regained when I feel like when I said like I feel like I've lost my sense of connection and interconnection, when I come back to that, when I come back to places like Mile High Church that help me remember that, when I get back into community, and God, I am so glad people were able to start coming back into community. When I have real felt experiences of that, like it feels like I get to gain something back. Like I'm able to recover something that perhaps has felt like it was lost, right? And when I recover that thing, it feels like the closest description that I have to like a true experience of the divine, as God, as I come to understand it in this moment. And when I feel that, right, like when I begin to feel what gets to be recovered, when I remember how interconnected we are, when I remember that like I can actually never be alone because this thing called God, this spirit, this divine energy is always continually welling up within me. And when I connect with that, when I give myself to that, it brings me into this realization that that same spirit, that same loving energy is welling up in each and every other being on this planet, human, plant, animal, or otherwise. Alien, I don't know if there's aliens here, probably. Like, it brings me back into this connection with myself, and this aspect of myself gets to be whole again. I get to feel this sense that nothing is missing, right? We talk about wholeness being a synonym for the experience of the divine, and it feels like that wholeness gets to be recovered, right? And when we do this, right, when we give ourselves to this, when we give ourselves to this deep interconnectedness and interdependence, when we give ourselves to this concept of oneness, not as just something that's nice to talk about, but as something that is a lived, felt reality, right? Something that brings us to our knees because it's so beautiful. Something that has us just stand in awe of the fact that we're so deeply connected to one another and to the earth itself. When we do that, like when we begin to like kind of go down that rabbit hole of oneness, anywhere we look, we can find ourselves finding even more interconnection in all of the ways that this is deeply present in all of these other interesting ways, right? Like one of the things I think that I'm really learning about when it comes to like climate change and pollution and climate justice, if that's a thing, are also the ways in which like there's deep interconnectedness with class and with race and with poverty in these things too. There's this young woman named Leah Thomas, and she calls herself an intersectional environmental activist and eco-communicator. She launched the Intersectional Environmentalist platform to explore the relationship between environmentalism and cultural identity. So she talks about her journey into this, and I want to share that with you. She said, "The summer after my freshman year of college, I went back home to St. Louis, Missouri, where I spent my time contemplating what major I wanted to pursue. After considering and deciding against biology, I gravitated towards the environmental science and policy program at my university. As the break came to a close, I declared my new major and I set my sights on Southern California for the new semester. Throughout my studies, I became startled by the facts that it was indeed harder for Black, brown, and low-income communities to have access to clean air, water, and natural spaces. Even worse, minority or low-income communities were statistically more likely to live in neighborhoods exposed to toxic waste, landfills, highways, and other environmental hazards. As my textbooks encouraged me to protect public lands so they could be preserved and enjoyed, I couldn't help but wonder, for whom? I wanted to protect the natural environment, but I also wanted to protect vulnerable communities like mine back home. I wasn't able to separate my identity from my environmentalism." It's amazing, right? When we talk about oneness, when we talk about like this idea that our connection to each other is grounded in love and compassion. When we give ourselves to that as a real thing, compassion just being this ability to feel with another, to sit in their space, to live in their shoes for a little bit. We begin to see how everything is so deeply connected, right, and interconnected. And how amazing is it, right? It can feel heavy at first when you read these things. You're like, wow, this is a reality. And I know this is a reality throughout the country. You know, I know like the poorest neighborhoods are often the ones that are exposed to the most pollution, who have the highways that are built through them. This is just categorically true across our nation. And you see that and you feel that, and it can feel heavy at first. But then you realize like that something is moved in you when you realize these things. Something is moved within you to want those things to be different. When something is moved in you for all the privilege that you may have experienced in your life, and maybe seeking to want to have those privileges be available to everybody. When something is moved in you just to have like, to think about yourself not as just this being that's like embodying this like spacesuit of skin and bones for this particular amount of time and having to do all we can just to protect this thing, that when we have the opportunity to move beyond that, to realize that our identity extends beyond space and time, right? Not just in this time that we're living in, but you know, if we're thinking about the planet, we're thinking about all the humans that are inhabiting it generations and generations from now. That is literally us like moving through this space-time continuum. It's us traveling in the future, and it's us living our lives right now for those people who haven't even incarnated on the planet yet. And that, right, that is a spiritual life. That to me is what a spiritual life looks like. That to me is what oneness calls us to. That to me is one of the deepest experiences of the divine, of oneness, that I know I can have. I know that any of us can have, right? And when you talk about like, if the real environmental problems, like that scientist said, are greed, selfishness, and apathy, right? We realize that coming back to our interconnectedness, coming back to this idea that we're all deeply interconnected, that we get to also transform in that process. That we can't not also be transformed as we're seeking to help heal. We can't not also be healed when we're seeking to do these things in the world. Like, as we give, so we receive. And as we receive, so are we able to give. Our community friend, Doug Goodfeather, who's a good friend of Dr. Patty, he wrote this amazing book. It came out yesterday. It's called Think Indigenous. And I got it on my iBooks yesterday, and I just have been so just diving into everything he has to say and everything he has to teach us. And I want to read some things, a couple passages from his book as we begin to close out the talk tonight, because I feel like it's such good medicine for us. And he talks about this give and take of how spiritual transformation happens within us when we begin caring for this beautiful planet that we're living on. He says, the first lesson of living in harmony with Grandmother Earth is learning the acts of self-care and self-actualization. We can't expect to live in harmony with Grandmother Earth if we're not in harmony with ourselves. And we can't expect to see changes in this world if we're not making changes within. So it's just amazing, right? We can focus deeply on our own spiritual transformation and know that like reverberates out, like when a pebble hits water, and know that reverberates out into the world. And we can also seek to like help heal the world and be a part of that, and like care for another as we would care for ourselves or someone that we deeply love, and feel like that in-breath of all of the ways that transforms us in that process as well. Like that it's continually going in both directions, no matter where our focus is, whether it's within or it's without, it's all the same. So I want to read this passage by Doug that I feel like is bringing us to a level of courage. Brene Brown talked about in her passage, right? Like what it's going to require as we move forward. If we're going to address the spiritual crisis and all of the ways in which we've been divided and are dividing ourselves, it's going to take some courage and it's going to take some resolve. And when I think about courage, right, I think about this archetype of the warrior. And Doug talks about this archetype in his book. And I just love his words about it. He says, genuine warriors do not take, they give. They don't destroy, they build. They don't abuse, they nurture. They don't hurt, they heal. They don't murder, they hold space for all life. To be a warrior is to be in service to the family, the community, and to Grandmother Earth. A warrior is willing to sacrifice all to protect the well-being of self and others by confronting the enemy. A spiritual warrior fights not because they hate the person in front of them, but because they love the people behind them. It is no longer acceptable just to toe the line of injustice. We must activate and step over that line. We must warrior up, get to the front lines, and take direct action. And when you are in direct action as a warrior, when you are facing the enemy, there will come a moment when your courage will end and fear will begin. When fear will now be in control of the situation, but then, often, something extraordinary will happen. A warrior, a spirit horse will rise within you, surging forward. On its back will be courage, and not that first level of courage that got you to this point. This type of courage is a whole other level of energy. It is something that's truer, more sacred, and more powerful. This level of courage delivers you to the clarity to see beyond the illusions of the world we live in today. This level of courage is impenetrable and indestructible. For those of you that will get that far, in that moment, you will experience true freedom, and there's nothing like it in the world. That's wholeness. That's oneness. That's freedom. Friends, I know as we look at the challenges before us, it feels like there's a lot of work to do. It can feel overwhelming. But what I know is that we are all incarnated in this garden together at the same time for a reason. And every single person that comes into your life that can help you remember that is like an angel sent from beyond. And every time you can hold space for another, for them to remember the courage that lies dormant within, the love that is continually just welling up from the deepest part of themselves, this feeling that there's nothing we can do to actually be disconnected, because the truest truth of this thing called life is that we are interconnected, that we are never alone, and that this thing called life is one that is shared, and shared through love, and shared through compassion. And so this is a tremendous opportunity we have here together as well. In this year 2021, how amazing, how crazy this year has been. But I believe that we are finding within ourselves and within each other that deeper courage, that courage that has been laying dormant, that courage that allows us to really feel the love and compassion that is being called forth from all of us. And I'm so excited. I'm excited to be here with all of you, to be walking this path and to be doing this thing called life together. So I want to close with a quote by Ernest Holmes, and I think he speaks to this beautifully. The world is perhaps at the point of the greatest crisis in all human history, and there seems to be two attitudes we can assume. One is calmness, faith, and conviction, and the other, despair. And despair is unthinkable. Let each, in their own way, dedicate their time, their service, their hope, and their spiritual conviction to the common cause of liberty and justice for all. And let's work without tiring and pray without ceasing. We know that on the battlefront and in the rear guard, something alive with meaning is taking place. Something vibrant with hope is happening. Something latent with the possibility of the future is being conceived. And so it is.
Will you stand in the fire with me and help me hold my ground? And if my courage fails and I start to run, turn me back around. Will you stand in the fire with me and open your heart with mine? I've never been down in such darkness before. It feels bigger than me this time. And I'm not asking you for answers to all of these questions or words to ease my mind. I just need somebody to listen sometimes. I will pay you back in kind. Will you stand in the fire with me? Tell me if you hear a sound after I call out to God for some kind of sign. Won't you show me that you're still around? Will you stand in the fire with me? Tell me that it's true, that there's a sunrise out there somewhere where I'm gonna smile, that there's hope for folks like me and you. And I'm not asking you for answers to all of these questions or words to ease my mind. I just need somebody to listen sometimes. I will pay you back in kind. Will you stand in the fire with me?
Thank you, Dr. Barry. So now's the time that we take part in this amazing law of circulation and just share of our gifts and tithes. It's just amazing to be a part of a spiritual community that has, just lived through this crazy time, but has just provided so much, connection throughout it all. It is amazing to be a part of a place that is dedicated to healing lives and empowering dreams. It's amazing to be a part of a community where every single person I get to meet is just this amazing beam of light, this incredible human. And knowing that there's like so many other people being drawn to this place, we're just so grateful that we get to do this work to create this community. And so every gift and tithe that we receive just goes towards that and supports that and supports people that are also still looking for a place like this. So just know like that every single gift is really an extension of your understanding, your commitment, your belief in, your love of how deeply interconnected we are. So I just invite you to take whatever gift you have. There are many different ways to give now. For those in the room, there's some bins on your way out if you want to do it old school that way. But I just invite you to take as a symbol for whatever you have to give, just hold that over your heart. And allow it to be this deep commitment to all of the ways in which we are dedicating to a deeper understanding of our interconnectedness. And this deeper belief that through that we could never, ever be alone. That this thing called God, spirit, life, love, the universe itself is a part of who we are. And as we connect with that, we connect with each and every other living being on this planet and to the planet itself, how good it is to be alive, tending this garden together. And this gift is a symbol of our commitment for being together in a good way as we go forth and walk each one of our days. So it's with that, with a grateful heart, we let it be, we let it become. And we let it be so. And so it is.
Where we live, the rain tumbles down. Food grows right up from the ground. And there's fruit upon the tree. As you please, and harvest time we sing and dance around. Where we live, the rivers run free, carry their precious water to the sea. From the mountains through the plains, one life is sustained for all people, for you and me. Enough for me and you. We have so much, we just have to give. Where we live, where we live. Where we live, the people are kind. Keeping our hearts in mind. The Great Spirit casts the dreams, and we play out the scenes. Stories as old as time. Where we live, we're learning how to share. 'Cause the gifts belong to people everywhere. From outer space we've seen it all. We're living on a
Wow, thank you, Barry, and thank you, band, and thank you, Masando. That was a very meaningful message you gave to us, so I so appreciate it. And I have the great honor of offering a prayer right now. We refer to it as a community prayer, and you mentioned community tonight. And so for all of you who are online and all the blessed beings that are in this room, let us just be still in this moment. For I recognize the community of humanity. And I lift this knowingness, this inner spark of divinity to that quality of the infinite God, which is harmonic love. And I behold that that harmonic love has always been. It is within the animals, the plants, the gentle breeze. And we as human beings, we remember who we are. That interconnectedness that has always been. So I declare this evening that right where we are, right where you are, where we stand in courage and we stand in truth and we stand in that everlasting love. And I give thanks for the love of Grandmother Earth and all her lessons. I feel her. I respect her. I respect the universe and universes. So I offer these spoken words out of the sincerity of my heart space. That there is health and well-being within the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body, because we are whole, we are complete, and we are perfect. So behold yourself right where you are as an orb of light, an orb of healing light. And I give thanks for the essence of love itself that knows how to heal and bring us together as brothers and sisters. To allow that love to be that essence of light that stands tall. It encompasses all. And it brings forth the greatest of relationships with family, with friends, with our brothers, our sisters, far and wide. And so I just affirm also that abundance of prosperity from the heart. The source is infinite and the supply is eternal. And we just take that in here this evening, recognizing that all our needs are abundantly met. And for this knowingness, I am grateful. Because the generosity comes from heart. The gratitude lives within our heart. So these words released as spoken to that universal, all-encompassing inner knowingness of love intelligence is released to that God heart, to that cosmic harmonic love. And it is done. Oh, and I give thanks. And I say with all sincerity that we are all related. All related. And so it is. Amen. Whew. So once again, I thank you for your presence, all of you. Thank you so much. And I would love it if you pass the word that you can go on the website at Mile High and you can sign up to be here next Wednesday, because we're going to continue the series. I'm going to be presenting on the spider in the web of life, and Reverend Masando and Reverend Simon are going to be with me in our conclusion of this service. It's going to be a great ritual. So if extended prayer is needed, you can go on our website, milehighchurch.org/prayer, and the Ministry of Prayer will pick that up and be holding you in consciousness. And also, this coming Sunday, our precious Reverend Josh will be with us in his series. So how about those of us in the house? Let's stand together. And you can stand at home too if you'd like, as we sing I Release.